So the day before I actually want to bake my bread, I take the sourdough starter out of the fridge, usually in the morning or by noon, and let it warm up a bit. And then I will feed it around noon so that it's nice and healthy for when I kind of harvest it in the evening to make my sponge. So around noon, the day before I'm going to be baking my bread, I've taken it out and I've removed about half of it, and actually more to the point, I've kept 230 grams, but that can be like 200, 240, whatever. As long as you add an equal amount of water and flour back into it to feed it. So in this case, it would be say another 115 grams of water and another 115 grams of flour to the starter, and that's to feed it. This leftover starter that would normally be discarded, you can actually use this to make pancakes or waffles. You just add it to any pancake or waffle recipe. Just makes them extra puffy. You can even add it to brownie mix, and yeah, makes it a bit more of a cakey brownie, but it's quite good. So yeah, you just add the extra water and flour. So now I'm going to add the extra water. This is the feeding. You don't have to be too exact. I sometimes go over a bit. I go to, like 128 grams of water. And then I just make sure I add the same amount of flour. So 128 grams of flour. So I've added the extra flour, which I forgot to tape, but it's the same amount, so 120 whatever it was grams of flour. And then you just mix it up, and then this evening around 9, this will have risen, so it'll have gone from there probably to like there, if not higher. And at that point, I'll do the same process, keeping about 130 grams of my starter, and then the part that I take out at 9 o'clock, that part will actually go into what's called the sponge. And the sponge is a mixture of flour, water, salt, and I add olive oil at that point. And that I leave overnight for the next morning when I'm making my bread proper. So now it's about 8 p.m. and it's risen, so you can tell it's like way above doubled. So now we're ready to harvest it, and we feed it, and then we use the rest for the sponge. So we keep 230 grams of the goop. Come on, 230. Or at least that's what I always keep. There we go, 230. Add 100 and something. I usually go like 120. 128. Good, fine. 128 of water and 128 grams of flour. It's just always equal. And then we stir that, and we put that back in the fridge. And we put the date on it so we know when we fed it last. So remember not to put a tight lid on, because it will explode otherwise. So I just put a paper towel and an elastic around, and I just put the lid on loosely over top. And I put that in my fridge. You can leave this out on your counter, but if you do, you'll have to feed it once a day. Whereas if you put it in the fridge, I've left it, up to a month, and you just have to make sure you give it a good 1 or 2 feedings before you try and use it afterwards. Now for the sponge, is 150 grams of flour, first of all. The sponge is what's going to actually be your bread dough, but you're starting it again I start at 8 at night. The night before I'm going to make bread. So 550 grams of flour. I put in 2.5 teaspoons of salt. I'm just finishing off the salt there. Now 450 grams of water. Room temperature or cold, sort of doesn't matter. As long as it's not hot, you just don't want it to kill the yeast. Okay, 450 grams of water. And lastly, we add all of whatever we have left of our starter. So just a second here. So all the rest of our starter. And it's never going to be exact because you never know how much you're going to get after the rise. Usually if it floats like that, it's a good sign because that means it's like nice and poofy and ready. So just do that. I like to mix it a small bit first, and then I do add 3 tablespoons, just very roughly, of olive oil. I don't know, I just do that. So I'm gonna do that off camera, but yeah, 3 tablespoons of olive oil just in the sponge, but you have to mix it in kind of a little bit beforehand. So don't worry if it's a bit shaggy, or even if it's all mixed in per se. Just as long as it's, mostly mixed in. I always find there's a bit of flour that lingers at the bottom that doesn't like to mix. Then you just cover this and you leave it overnight, and I'll finish making the bread tomorrow morning. So today is bread making day. It's 6 a.m. This is where your sponge, which you can see kind of why they call it a sponge, has risen quite a bit. And I measure out 2 additional cups of flour. So one of these cups, all of it is going to go in, and the other one I'm going to add just periodically as the dough is mixing in the stand mixer. You can do this by hand. I'm just being really lazy this morning. So you're going to add all of one, and then you're just going to add some of the other cup of flour, and the other cup you're just going to add it whenever it starts to look like the dough is sticking to the side. And yeah, it'll go, you'll probably use between 1/4 and 3/4 cups of flour in addition to that, in addition to the 1 cup. So a total of an additional 1 1/4 to 1 3/4 probably. So you'll see the dough is kind of sticking a little bit to the side there. So this is where I add a little bit of flour. It's really hard to do this with a camera in my hand. But anyway, it basically just, lets it pull away from the side. And you just add a little bit of the additional flour. As I say, I'll use, anywhere between 1/4 and 3/4 of this, in addition to the 1 cup of flour. And it should start just to form a ball that pulls away and doesn't seem to stick to the side at all. And that's when you know pretty much good. I always need to let it go for a little longer after that. So I've actually used a lot of my second cup of flour here, which is a good example. It changes every time you do this, but you might need to just scrape down the sides. I find that helps a little bit, so I use this to just kind of scrape down the sides, and that helps sort of start the ball forming. Another thing that I find sometimes helps is if I crank the speed, it'll form into a ball a little faster and then stay in a ball a little better. But you don't want to leave it on high for too long, so. Whoa, that's maybe a little too fast there. So mine is very sticky today, so I'll probably end up using more flour this time. But you don't want to use too much, so I'll probably just use the rest of this. Because, again, it just depends on how humid or how hot or cold it is. So, 2 cups of flour should be fine. So you'll see that it's no longer sticking to the sides when I'm mixing it on high, and that means it's pretty much done. I just let it mix for a little bit longer. When I turn it down, it will look like it's sticking again, so don't be alarmed if it's like sticking when you turn the whole thing off. And if you're doing it by hand, you know, just again, 1 to 2 cups of flour is what you'll need. So not an exact science, it's just however it feels at that day. So if you want it to form a ball when you're kneading vigorously and when you're or when you're using a stand mixer. So you'll see that my dough today did not form into a nice ball, even after 2 additional cups of flour. That's perfectly normal. It just sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. So I guess I shouldn't have told you that it needed to turn into a ball. But anyway, don't worry about it, because then what you're going to do is you're just going to transfer it to another bowl. You sort of don't have to, but I find it's a lot easier, because what I'll do is I put some olive oil in this bowl just to keep the dough from sticking. And then once it's transferred into here, into this bowl, I do this method that I've looked up, or I found online. You don't have to, just put it in the bowl, let it sit for 4 or 5 hours, you know, however long. But what I do is I put this in this bowl, and then every hour I wet my hands down, and I take my hand and I kind of like pull a piece up and fold it, and then I rotate it, pull a piece up, fold it, pull a piece up, fold it, and once it's all folded, I cover it again and let it sit for another hour, and then after an hour I do a fold, fold, fold. Never punching it down. You never punch it down at this point. The reason why you never punch it down is because you're going to be getting a lot of bubbles, and you're pulling and folding is incorporating those carbon dioxide bubbles into the dough, and helping it sort of form the gluten. So yeah, so I'll hopefully get a video of that. It's hard to take a video by myself. I'll have to grab my partner and be like, film me doing a pull and fold, which sounds weird. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, you'll see it's a very sticky dough right now. I guess my apartment is not as hot now. They turned down the heat from the winter, so I think it just absorbs or retains more of the water. But again, doesn't matter. This is totally fine. It's gonna look a bit shaggy sometimes, and then, like I said, every hour or so, I'm gonna do like, put my hand underneath it, like I have a wet hand, put my hand underneath, pull, fold, pull, fold, pull, fold, pull, fold, and then I let it sit. So at this point, you just cover it, put a nice cloth over top to keep it to keep the moisture in and keep the warmth in, and let it sit. So for anywhere between 4 to 6 hours. As I say, I do my pull and fold, that's every hour, but a total of approximately 4 to 6 hours. Okay, so this is my pull and fold thingamadoodle. So my hand is wet, and I just go under it. Ooh, this is very wet dough today. And you just do that. And this just helps it sort of form a ball. And you just do that, and I'm going to leave it another hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, do the same thing again, and it'll just rise each time. And that just helps form the gluten. So you just cover it again after this. So you'll see that the dough has risen quite a bit. This is after a few folds, and you'll notice that there's like these bubbles. You want to keep those. I'm going to do a couple more folds because it's now, yeah, it's 11:30, and I've done 3 folds. So we'll just do maybe 1 or 2 more, and then I'll shape the dough into the bannetons. You can just use a regular bread pan, or even just put it on a parchment paper to form it. Okay, so now that it's risen, I take the whole thing and divide it in half, and I do it by weight. So it says it was 15,000 or 1.5, what is it? 1.5 grams? That doesn't make sense, but whatever. Anyway, so roughly 750. Ooh, it's very sticky this time. And you have to have it on a floured surface because obviously it's going to be super sticky. That's good enough. 750. So then, this part, you don't punch it down because you don't want to lose any of the bubbles that you got, but you kind of fold in, fold in, fold in, fold in, and then you tip it over, and you just kind of pull at it. And what this does is it kind of stretches the skin of the bread, and you just hold your hand like right against the surface that you're making it on, and just kind of pull it towards you and then shift, and that stretches it out. And this particular bread is very sticky, so it's kind of causing me a bit of trouble, but that's fine. Oh yeah, it really is. Whew. Okay, there we go. Now it's starting to form. So it kind of takes a little bit. Okay, that's good. So then you take this and put it in whatever you're putting it in. I put it in a banneton. These are just lightly floured. Well, actually heavily floured. But you put it in the banneton. And then I'm just going to do it with the other one. Just reflour it a bit. And ooh. So again, don't do the thing there, and you just kind of roll it. This one, because it's going into a long banneton, I sometimes roll it a bit more oblong, but it really doesn't matter because it just fits whatever thing you're putting it in. So I don't really worry too much about it. And there we go. And it'll kind of stick to the surface, but you just do that. Now you don't have to put it in the banneton. You can just put it in a regular bread one, or you can put it on a piece of parchment paper. Putting it on parchment paper I don't like to do as much because the bread dough will kind of collapse a little bit if it's too weak. So I do like it in some kind of container. So then I cover these, and I actually cover them and I let them rise in the fridge for another hour. The reason why you put them in the fridge is because now they're pretty active, and if you let them rise outside of the fridge, they'll collapse a lot faster, and it also helps, I think, make the flavor better. So yeah, again, just divide it in half, floured surface, roll it into the shape you want, put it into a container, and that's it. So, and this is about 3 o'clock or 3 p.m. now. Okay, so I've preheated the oven at 450, and I'm going to cook it in a Dutch oven. You don't have to. If you aren't cooking in a Dutch oven, then just do all this stuff on your parchment paper or whatever and just slide it in. Also, though, we do have a pizza stone in there, and that helps keep it from getting burnt on the bottom. So, but if you're doing it in a Dutch oven, then the first thing you need to do is you need to put down like some cornmeal or something on the bottom of the Dutch oven just to keep the bread from sticking. So I just put a little bit in there. Then this part I just do pretty quickly. So I get my bread from the fridge, and I've left this till it's 8 o'clock now, so I actually left it longer than I thought I would. But so your bread doesn't necessarily look like as if it's risen. It's because it's been in the fridge. You don't have to worry. That's totally fine. So you just, yeah, there we go. And now I like to use 1 egg and just put it on, brush it on to the loaf. You don't have to do this, but I like it. It makes the crust really nice. And the one thing about the Dutch oven is if you get egg on the sides of the Dutch oven, it starts cooking. Then, actually, I just gotta slide this over just a tad. It's kind of weird there. Now, I'm gonna sprinkle on, we've got some black sesame seeds. Sprinkle those on. So again, you could just do this all not in the Dutch oven if you are putting it on parchment paper, or if you're putting it in a regular bread pan. But yeah, this is how I'm doing it. So we got that, and then lastly, you have to score your bread, and this is to help make sure that some of the air can escape. I always find this difficult inside the Dutch oven, but you don't have to, you don't go deep with the scoring of it, just do it over top of the skin of it. And once that's over, never forget your oven mitts, because I was about to pick it up without my oven mitts. But we put that on, and we put it right back into the oven. And that will go in there for 35 minutes. Now, if you're doing it in a Dutch oven, it's 35 minutes, and then you take off the lid, and I found you have to put it on for another 20 minutes or so. So a total of 55 minutes. However, if you're just doing it on a parchment paper, not in a Dutch oven, then it's just 35 minutes usually it's done. But basically you want it to be brown, and if it looks like it's nice and golden, leave it a bit longer, because you almost want it to look like you're just about to go a bit too far with it. So yeah, so anyways, with the Dutch oven, 35 minutes with the lid on, 20 minutes with the lid off. With just a bread pan, or if you're putting it on a piece of parchment paper and just sliding it into the oven, then it's 35 minutes. Okay, so it's been 35 minutes, and now because it's in the Dutch oven, it doesn't get a nice brown crust until it is done. So I take that off, and you'll see that it's now kind of risen a bit, and we have to close it back up for another 20 minutes. Again, if you were just doing this not in a Dutch oven, then you wouldn't, it would probably be done by now, about 35 minutes, but I find the Dutch oven gives it a nice, nice crust. Something about keeping the moisture in or something like that is what I've read. Anyway, so another 20 minutes. Okay, so if you look in there, it looks like it's nice and golden, but we actually want it to be a little bit past that. So I'm actually going to leave it on for maybe even another 5 minutes. So as I say, this can change from loaf to loaf. So I'm leaving it in for another, I'm just going to leave it in for another maybe 5-10 minutes. So yeah, be a total of an hour cooking time, which is kind of a lot, it seems, but trust me, it makes a difference. So it actually took a little bit longer, which is fine. Sometimes it just does. But yeah, anyway, that's how I make my bread. So it was 35 minutes with the lid on, about 25 with the lid off, and now it's just cooling, and you want to make sure this has cooled entirely before you cut it, because it's still kind of cooking inside and there's still steam that's getting trapped inside, which you want. You can cut it now, but only if you really want to eat the entire loaf right now, because I find it goes stale a lot faster if you cut it open straight out of the oven. So it's delicious when it's fresh, don't get me wrong, but if you want it to last a little while longer, then let it cool entirely before cutting it. Anyway, that is how I make my sourdough bread.